Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting this important debate on the historic injustice of the wrongful imprisonment of 37 Cammell Laird workers who, in 1984, occupied their workplace in protest at redundancies, privatisation, threats of closure. They were sacked, they lost their jobs, redundancy and pension rights, and sent to prison in an unprecedented assault on trade unionists. They have been fighting ever since to clear their names, and it is my honour to be their voice in this place today. And I want to put on record my register of interest as the chair of the All-Parliamentary Group on the Miscarriages of Justice. And I'd like to begin by recognising the work of those who helped bring this debate here today, and they are the 37 themselves. They are Billy Albertina, Eddie Albertina, Francis Albertina, Jimmy Albertina, John Albertina, Jimmy Barton, Christopher Billsborough, John Brady, Michael Byrne, Thomas Cassidy, Thomas Culshaw, John Dooley, Lol Duffy, Colin Early, Nicholas Finian, John Flynn, Andrew Fraser, Barry Golding, Paul Hennessy, Edward Kenny, Paul Little, Eddie Marnell, Jimmy McCarthy, Anthony McGarry, Philip McEwen, Michael Mooney, Aidan Morley, Sam Morley, Alan Pryor, Francis Roach, Stephen Smith, Christopher Thompson, Tommy Webb, Tommy Wilson, Chris Whitley, George Whittaker and John Wright. And there are several other people I want to thank, including the previous MP for Birkenhead, my very good friend Mick Whitley, whose brother was one of the 37, for his tireless work and campaigning both in and outside of Parliament. Thanks to my honourable friend, the MP for Harrow West, who led the Westminster Hall debate on the topic back in 2023 and has continued to support the campaign. I would also like to recognise the contribution of the MP for Birmingham Northfield, who has a long history of supporting the campaign as a GMB officer and who used one of his first written parliamentary questions as an MP to secure a commitment from the then Justice Minister to consider a review into the jailing of the Cammell Laird workers. I'm happy to give way.
Lawrence Turner.
I'm both grateful to her and I wish to congratulate her on securing tonight's debate and for reading again into the record the names of the 37. I wonder if I might put two sentiments of my own on record. The first is a tribute to the work of Eddie Marnell, who over many years as a member of GMB's North Western Irish region and the Central Executive Council championed their cause outside this House and through the union inside it. I also wish to pay tribute to the work of my former colleagues at GMB. I can attest to the many hours which have been spent in support of that cause, and I understand that the union is due to meet the campaign again in the new year.
Kim Johnson.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention and again support his support for Eddie Marnell, and I look forward to the continued support of GMB going forward. I will happily give way.
Can I commend everybody for Liverpool Riverside for bringing this forward? And I also attended that debate in Westminster Hall along with the Honourable Lady and others and fully support the campaign. The Honourable Lady has referred to standing on the picket line in an earlier question for the resident doctor's statement that took place before. Like her, I've stood in the picket line along with nurses and others in Newton Ards on many occasions. The imprisonment and the removal of the redundancy packages would not normally occur in any instance where a workforce has decided to strike, and many of these workers never regain stable employment. So does the Honourable Lady agree with me that there is definitely a case to be answered in terms of the regaining of finance, and more must be done to seek justice for the 37 workers that still suffer today and haven't had justice?
Thank my honourable friends and totally agree. Justice does need to be served, and those 37 have been affected because of the financial demands that were put on them because of the action that they took. They were striking workers and not criminals and should never have gone to prison. And I'd like to pay tribute to Paul Heron and Claire Lash-Williams, who are providing legal advice for the campaign with the intention to launch a successful legal appeal against their original charges. And I'd like also to pay thanks to the GMB Union for their support, and I look forward to their continued support going forward. In 1984, faced with sweeping redundancies and the decline of the shipbuilding industry, workers at Cammell Laird occupied their workplace, including a gas rig and a Royal Navy frigate, to resist job losses and defend their livelihoods and their communities. Management's response, backed by the government at the time, was swift and very heavy-handed. The workers were threatened with dismissal, the loss of their redundancy payments, and even police intervention. They were deliberately targeted to send a warning to others, an attempt by the state to break industrial action and demoralise workers taking strike action across the country. The workers reluctantly agreed to end their occupation in September 1984 after weeks, when their water supply was cut off. They were immediately arrested for failing to turn up to court for an earlier judicial review hearing. They were convicted in their absence and sent to Walton Jail, Merseyside's Category A high security prison. Their appeal at the High Court in October 1984 was presided over by Lord Lawton, who had been a member of Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists. He had visited Hitler in the 1930s and had been selected to run for Parliament. He was a long-standing enemy of the trade union movement and was the only too happy to uphold the unprecedented 30-day prison sentence for contempt of court, a grossly disproportionate punishment. The whole case stinks of an establishment stitch-up. There were plenty of other similar cases at the time throughout the movement. Not even the NUM leader, Arthur Scargill, was imprisoned despite being convicted of the same charge. The only comparable case of an imprisonment of a large group of workers due to a national dispute was the Shrewsbury 24, and 47 years later, their convictions have now finally been overturned by the CCRC. When the 37 were charged with contempt of court and sent to a high-security prison, Liverpool City Council was locked in a fierce battle with the Thatcher government at the time over a 30 million cut to central government funding for what was deemed by the government as an illegal budget. The council remained defiant, adopting the mantra, "We would rather break the law than break the poor." More than anything, it focused on building council homes and creating jobs, work unmatched by any other authority at the time. This was the political environment in which the Cammell Laird 37 had to contend with. The workers fought proudly, not only for their own jobs, but for the future of the shipyards. Their only crime, if you call it a crime, was defending their livelihoods. The strikers ensured that there was absolutely no damage to any property during their occupation. The strikers even allowed the MOD inspectors into the occupation to inspect the frigate and carry out maintenance work. Criminals, no. Responsible trade unions carrying out legitimate action at their own workplace and respecting the property they were in control of. And for this, they were incarcerated in prison for 30 days. The Justice for the Cammell Laird 37 campaign resonates deeply with my constituents in Liverpool Riverside and across Merseyside. They are widely considered heroes for standing up to Thatcher's policies of managed decline that destroyed our industries and decimated our communities. This struggle took place against the backdrop of the broader union fightbacks and parallel injustices such as Orgreave and Hillsborough, where ordinary people paid the price for fighting back against a government hell-bent on crushing working-class communities. 4 decades later, the fight for justice continues. Sadly, half of the 37 have died while waiting for their names to be cleared. Action is needed now to ensure that the surviving workers receive justice, because justice delayed is a justice denied. I grew up in Liverpool during the Thatcher years. The neoliberal policies enforced in our city would define us for years to come. Liverpool in the 80s was highly dependent on the docks for work. We suffered unemployment rates of almost 50%. Our communities were deeply aware that the fight for jobs was not just to improve the current situation, but to preserve jobs and workplaces for generations to come. Thatcher's privatisation drive resulted in British shipbuilders going from employing 62,000 workers in 1982 to just 5,000 workers 5 years later. And in Merseyside alone, we lost 34,000 manufacturing jobs between 1978 and 1981 due to Thatcher's policy of managed decline. It was this hollowing out of industry that these workers were trying to defeat. They deserve full recognition and gratitude for the struggle they waged and an apology for the disgraceful way they were treated. The Justice for the Cammell Laird 37 campaign, like the Shrewsbury 24, the mine strike and so many other union struggles of the time, goes to the very heart of how Thatcher's government responded to workers who dared to stand up for themselves. I remember the police brutality inflicted on striking miners at Orgreave, followed by lies and cover-ups by politicians, the police and the media. And I'm proud that this Labour government has now committed to a full inquiry into Orgreave. It follows logically that there should be a public inquiry into the jailing of the Cammell Laird workers. A miscarriage of justice with many obvious parallels. However, the priority now must be releasing the government papers to help the legal team clear their names of the 37. And there is no doubt that this was a major miscarriage of justice, sanctioned at the highest levels of government. No other industrial action resulted in so many men being sent to prison. The 30-day sentence was grossly unfair. By the time they were released, the men had lost their jobs, workplace rights, their redundancy payments and pension payments. Research by the GMB shows that at least one of the men could have lost 120,000 or more. Some were blacklisted for many years and struggled to find work afterwards, causing immense suffering and economic hardship. For the reason we believe there should be a public inquiry. The limited records from the National Archives and Thatcher's private papers demonstrate that ministers were determined to privatise the building of warships, cut the number of shipbuilding yards and sell off the remainder of state-owned yards. The Cammell Laird 37 knew that this was what they were up against at the time, a government hell-bent on privatisation at any cost. It is a systematic, ideologic-driven undermining of the British shipbuilding industry by a group of ministers determined to drive through the complete privatisation of British shipbuilders, regardless of the wider economic and social consequences that warrants a public inquiry, so the 37 and all those impacted can understand why the treatment they received was so uniquely punitive and destructive. A public inquiry is not merely symbolic, it is essential. It is crucial to understand how and why a government, acting through ministers and court, imposed such punitive measures on ordinary citizens for exercising their right to industrial action. We are calling for the actions of ministers from the time to be investigated, for all the remaining records to be made public. This includes the Ministry of Defence and British Gas contracts and any Crown estate leases relevant for a future appeal. Following a GMB campaign almost a decade ago, the European Parliament Committee on Petitions called on the UK Government to release all relevant papers, but this has never been actioned. And more importantly, we want a formal government apology for these workers. The legal team believed the court was given inaccurate information at the time of the initial prosecutions and that the workers may not have been lawfully dismissed. They argue that Cammell Laird may have had no legal standing to bring the claims that led to the injunctions and that the occupation may have occurred on land that was not under the company's control. These claims are groundbreaking, and with the help of the Minister today, we can ensure that the campaign's legal team has access to the appropriate documentation to finally bring about justice for the 37. that during the 2023 Westminster Hall debate, led by the Honourable Member for Harrow West, the Justice Minister at that time stated that his department had conducted extensive searches of its records and those in the court and prison system, and he confirmed that he understood that nothing had been found in relation to the Cammell Laird strike action or the strikers themselves. He almost confirmed that other departments, including the Cabinet Office, Home Office and the then Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, also confirmed that they believe they don't hold any relevant record, which I find quite astounding. However, the Cammell Laird campaigners believe an exhaustive search hasn't been undertaken. Papers must exist that relate to the closure, and every effort should be made to identify and release them.
Will she give way?
I'm happy to give way.
Mr. Madders.
Grateful to my honourable friend for giving way and congratulate her on bringing this debate. Also declare for the record my membership of the G&B Trade Union. I was at that Westminster Hall debate when the government minister at the time said a search had been taken. I think it's fair to say, given the way she has spoken today about the highest levels of government pushing this issue forward, I think it's very hard for us to believe that an exhaustive search was conducted at the time. But would you agree with me that what our Shadow Minister said during that debate, and I quote, that a Labour government would release documents held by government relating to the Cammell Laird prosecutions and carry out a review into the jailing of the striking workers is something that we should be able to agree very, very quickly indeed?
I welcome my good friend's intervention. I totally agree, and I'm hoping in the Minister's summing up we might hear something direct in relation to that request. But we do need answers as to who was behind the incarceration of the 37 Cammell Laird workers for contempt of court. These men weren't vandals, they weren't criminals, they were trade unionists defending their jobs, pensions and the future of the shipyard. And in conclusion, I would be grateful if the Minister, during his summing up, could give full commitment for the search for the truth, for the government to release every relevant document, fully investigate the decisions that led to their imprisonment, and agree to meet with the campaigners and the legal team to discuss what support they need to exonerate all workers. 41 years on, the call remains the same. Justice for the Cammell Laird 37. They deserve our recognition and our gratitude for their courage in standing up and fighting back. And while this debate, whatever follows, will not undo the damage done to the lives of those men, to their families and to our communities, it will go a long way towards achieving justice. Jobs, not jail, still must remain the guiding principle. They deserve our full support in securing a formal government apology and clearing their names. We will not rest until the truth is uncovered and justice is finally done. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate the Honourable Member for Liverpool Riverside on securing this important debate this evening and her powerful speech, characteristically powerful speech on this really important issue. And I join her in praising all the campaigners, of course, in particular the 37 names that she read out in the House today. I also declare an interest as a member and a proud member of the G&B Trade Union, and again praise their work on this important issue. As we've heard, Madam Deputy Speaker, in 1984, 37 workers were involved in an occupation at the Cammell Laird shipyard at Birkenhead in a bid to stop compulsory redundancies. The 37 men were sentenced to 30 days imprisonment for contempt of court after defying a judge's orders to leave a partially built gas rig. They were imprisoned for 30 days in HNP Walton. They were subsequently dismissed from their jobs and they lost their right to redundancy and a pension. I want to begin by stating on record that I recognise that the actions and that the experience they suffered was a disgrace, and although it occurred before I was born, the issues raised and the profound effect that has had on those 37 workers and indeed the communities that my right honourable friend represents is profound. I'm deeply sympathetic to the case and to the individuals affected by it, and I recognise that for some, due to the passage of time, some of those individuals have sadly passed away. Before I turn to the specific question being posed, I would like to, if I may, emphasise that this government is committed to tackling injustice and ensuring fair and progressive rights in the workplace, so these types of malpractice never happen again. And I'm very aware that I'm about to set out many measures that the government are hoping to introduce in their Employment Rights Bill. And I pay tribute to my honourable friend, the member for Ellesmere Port, who is here and sitting there, who's done so much work on this, both in opposition and then in government. The plan to make work pay sets out the government's ambitious agenda to deliver by ensuring employment rights are fit for a modern economy, empowering working people and contributing to economic growth. The plan will bring our employment rights legislation into the 21st century. The government fulfilled its manifesto commitment to bring forward legislation within 100 days of entering office by introducing the Employment Rights Bill. As the House will no doubt be aware, the bill is currently going through ping-pong and is in the first phase of delivering our plan to get Britain moving forward and create the right conditions for long-term, sustainable, inclusive and secure economic growth. I would like to stress that blacklisting is completely unacceptable and has no place in modern employment relations. Any individual or trade union who believes they have been the victim of blacklisting can and should enforce their rights for an employment tribunal or the county court. The 2010 blacklisting regulations are reinforced by powers in the Data Protection Act 2018, protecting use of personal data, including information on trade union membership and sensitive personal data. The Information Commissioner's Office regulates use of personal data, investigates breaches of that data. It has the power to take enforcement action, including searching premises, issuing enforcement notices and imposing fines for serious breaches. Now, the question posed by the debate is whether there are potential merits of holding a public inquiry into the Cammell Laird workers' imprisonment in 1984. And I recognise, as has been discussed already in the Chamber, this is an issue of abiding parliamentary interest, including it being the subject of a Westminster Hall debate in February 2023, before I was a member in this place, moved by the Honourable Member for Harrow West, and among the Honourable Members generally in Parliament for some time who have long campaigned for justice in this area. Public inquiries are independent investigations into matters of significant public concern. They are established by the government and led by an independent chair. They are usually asked to establish the facts surrounding a serious issue and consider lessons to be learnt from what has happened, as well as make recommendations intended to correct the deficiencies for the future. For example, an inquiry may be established to look at the cause of a major disaster, accident or other event involving significant damage or loss of life. When government considers that a matter is sufficiently serious to warrant inquiry, there are a number of options for the form of the inquiry might take, including establishing an inquiry under the Inquiries Act 2005. Critically, Madam Deputy Speaker, although the Ministry of Justice owns the Inquiries Act 2005 and the Inquiries Rules 2006, Justice Ministers do not decide whether to set up an inquiry. That falls to the Department with policy or operational responsibility for the issue under consideration. Industrial relations and how they were historically dealt with are not a matter for me or the Ministry of Justice, and as such it would be inappropriate for me to comment on the potential merits of an inquiry in this instance. As has already been touched upon, and as was set out by a predecessor in the Ministry of Justice in the Westminster Hall debate, obviously document disclosure is a vital part of any inquiry, or indeed any assessment of whether an inquiry is necessary. As the government have previously disclosed, my department has conducted those extensive searches of our records within the court and prison systems, and nothing has been found in relation to the Cammell Laird strike action or the strikers themselves. Other departments have likewise previously confirmed they do not hold potentially relevant material. But I've heard what the Honourable Member has to say, and tomorrow morning I'll go back to my department and make sure those searches are done again and send correspondence to the relevant departments to make sure they do those again as well. It is important to note, as has already been accepted, that inquiries do not determine civil or criminal liability. They are not a substitute for court proceedings, and they do not determine guilt or award compensation. The appropriate route to challenge a conviction and/or sentences by way of appeal, such as once the appeal route has been exhausted, it is possible to apply to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, where a person believes they have been wrongly convicted of a crime. In England, Wales or Northern Ireland, a request can be made to the Independent Criminal Cases Review Commission, who can investigate and, where appropriate, refer cases back to court. The Commission has... Yes.
I thank my own friend for giving way. The Hillsborough campaign fought for an independent panel, and it was through an independent panel that information was brought to light which enabled them to move forward. Does my honourable friend believe that an independent panel would help the 37 campaigners moving their case forward?
I take the suggestion very seriously. As I said, on terms of the documents disclosure, which I think is the first step for the campaign and what the my honourable friend is seeking, tomorrow morning I will be going into my department and I will be looking at this issue again. And her speech in this campaign and the adjournment debate has meant that will happen, and I can assure her that I will do that and take that very seriously indeed. And we consider no options are off the table on this. Yes, of course.
One of the areas that is worth exploring is the Cabinet papers themselves and what discussion took place, because these Cammell Laird workers are the innocent victims of a political strategy that was devised in Cabinet to suppress all opposition to the introduction of the monetary policies, the monetarism under the Thatcher government during that period. The honourable gentleman may not have been born at the time, but I was, and what was happening was that any area of resistance to the government was suppressed. So as a GLC councillor, we were abolished. In Lambeth and as well in Liverpool, councillors were surcharged and removed from office. And then individual trade unionists were then suppressed in a way which was more brutal than we ever thought possible, both in terms of the way they inflicted damage as a result of forcing trade union action, but also the imprisonment. This resides in the Cabinet discussions that were taking place at the time, and in particular Nicholas Ridley, etc., and as we saw in the Shrewsbury campaign, the influence that they had on the courts as well.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend's intervention. Me making a point about the passage of time was not me being flippant about the seriousness of this. In my constituency is the site of where the Orgreave events occurred, and I'm very pleased that this Labour government has launched a public inquiry. I'm not going to comment on individual disclosure searches for different departments, different conversations at the dispatch box. I'm sure he can appreciate that that wouldn't be appropriate. I've made a commitment to look at this issue again when I go back to my department tomorrow morning. I do take that seriously and will keep him and other members updated. One of the difficult aspects of the Cammell Laird workers' imprisonment is that these were committals for contempt of court, which is a civil matter rather than convictions for criminal offences. This is a technical issue, but this case therefore does not meet the criteria for a miscarriage of justice, which relates to wrongful convictions. This might appear to be an issue of semantics, but as there are distinct processes which apply in cases where a person has wrongfully been convicted of a criminal offence, it is important that we are clear on the distinctions between a miscarriage of justice and what we may term a historic injustice. The Law Commission is currently reviewing, at the Government's request, the law on contempt of court. The first part of their report on liability for contempt was published last month, and the second part will be published next year and will include a review of routes of appeal and also the sanctions courts are able to impose for different types of contempt. Therefore, Madam Deputy Speaker, in conclusion, I'm deeply sympathetic to the case and to the campaign and to the individuals who are affected by this. Industrial relations and how they were historically dealt with are not necessarily a matter for the Ministry of Justice. I've made a number of commitments to this dispatch box to look at certain issues again as a result of this adjournment debate. That is this House working, and I repeat those commitments, and I'll report back to the honourable member. I thank her for tabling this debate and the opportunity she has given me to respond to it and the actions I take from it.